Chapter 19. Coupled. The night after, Cleo was not playing a lone hand. Prince was assisting, and they played together against whosoever and whatsoever they might come athwart. Coupled. It was about 9 o'clock when they left Dorlan and Schaffer's oyster saloon in Fulton Market, having partaken of a dozen bivalves each on the half-shell. Proceeding up Beekman, they turned into Water Street to the north. They intended to do some one or more of the dance-halls in that locality. The street, its peculiar prestige now departed, was dark, dull, and deserted until Dover Street was reached. The light and music from one dance-hall only, that of Christopher's, between Peck Slip and the street named, illumining the darkness and breaking the stillness. Between Dover and Roosevelt Street, things looked a little livelier. There was more light, and there were more people about. Between these streets, on the east side of Water Street, they passed the dance-halls of Johnny Wagstaff and Jim Finnegan. Without entering they kept on, and crossing Roosevelt Street, were then in what was, since its glory had departed, the gayest part of Water Street, taking the blocks on either side between the last-named street and James Slip, and where Jack Perry and Gallus Mag, in conjunction, Liverpool Mary Ann, and other noted denizens of the locality, run dance-houses for the delectation of all desiring entertainment in that line. The Sailor's Retreat, a most delectable place, being located on the west side of the way, and nearly opposite the two places we have mentioned. Here it was quite lively and quite light. Sailors and Cyprians were rolling about, the one, and promenading the other. And longshoremen, bummers, roughs, thieves, et hoc genus omne, were to be seen, loafing and bobbing around. The dance-halls, from which proceeded rheumatic, asthmatic, and dyspeptic music, were lighted to their full extent, and the greengrocers, cheap and nasty, bread shops, ditto, barber shops, shaving 5 cents, hair-cutting 10 cents, and other shops of low degree, with lager beer saloons, rum shops, whiskey mills, bar rooms, drinking and refreshment saloons, or whatever you see fit to call them, were also as brilliant as possible, and would have sent more light into the street had their several windows been washed within a year of previous, the dirt on the same preventing the street from getting full benefit of the light within. But then, you must remember that the proprietors were not bound to light the street, and what they did do in that way was not done from public spirit, but for their own private ends, which is mankind, as a general thing, the world over. And now a few words concerning our heroine. Cleo was clad in a dark grey suit, the coat a sack, and the vest double-breasted. She wore a low-crowned, soft felt hat, nearly matching her clothes in colour, while pearl-coloured gloves covered her hands. 2 small spheres of gold lay on her shirt-front, in lieu of the solitaires generally gleaming there, and no more showy than these was the small, plain gold watch-chain she sported. A low-standing collar, and a dark red tie, the bow faultlessly formed, encircled her neck. She carried her whip as usual, and as usual, or as she often did, whipped her right leg every time it came to the fore. She was toned down greatly in dress, and so, too, was Prince, and the reason was, they had been taking in a portion of the back slums, and the night was yet young. They would probably take in more before morning, at least, so they intended. "We'll go in here, take in Gallus Mag's place first," said Prince, halting before number 337. "This, with Liverpool Mary Ann's," he continued, "is about the most recherche dancing academy on the street, now that John Allen, the wickedest man in New York, has retired from the scene of his labors." "All right, Hal, let's take in Gallus Mag's place by all means," said Cleo, laughing, "and then we'll call on Mary Ann of Liverpool. Come on." With this, she and Prince entered the dance-hall, which, with its low ceiling, ornamented with colored tissue paper, its grimy walls hung with cheap-colored prints, its benches around the sides, its sanded floor, and its bar in the rear was, and is today, a fair sample of Water Street terpsichorean establishments. A dance was on as they entered, and the full band of 3 pieces, fiddle, harp, and tambourine, was in active operation, and if not discoursing sweet music, was doing all it was capable of doing in the way of sound. The company was a mixed one, as far as age, sex, color, and calling were concerned, though in the matter of statues, leaving out our heroine and her companion, Extremes did not meet, all standing upon the same broad plane, having but a slightly ascending grade. There were present longshoremen, short seamen, 2 of the latter being of the African persuasion, cavalrymen, 3 or 4, and others whose occupation was not so apparent, but which could be readily guessed by anyone who could tell a thief from a theologian, a pickpocket from a physician, a bummer from a businessman, a rough from a recluse, or a cutthroat from a country constable. The feminine element was a varied lot. It ranged in color, from black to white, with browns and creams between; in age, from sweet 16 to sour 60, or a little short of that in one instance; in spirits, from grave to gay, from lively to severe; in dress, from plain to loud; in manners, well, perhaps the least said about manners the better; in personal attraction, from repulsive to beautiful, there being one truly beautiful young girl present. We must say, however, that the graduation in looks was not kept up step by step from one extreme to the other, there being an awful chasm between the creature less repulsive than the others, and the one girl truly beautiful. The step down from the pedestal of the latter to the plane of the one who would have been pronounced second in point of attractiveness was a tremendous one, and must have been felt by one, if not the other. There were, perhaps, 40 persons of both sexes present, the sterner sex predominating. Rather more than half were tripping the light fantastic toe, or stamping the heavy heel upon the sanded floor, all in a free and easy, rough and ready manner, the men with their hats on, and all smoking pipes or villainous cigars, and the women smoking too, the majority of them. Among the notables present entitled to distinguished consideration, exclusive of Jack Perry and Gallus Mag, the latter so called from the loudness of her attire, a stout-built woman of the blonde variety, good-natured and not bad-hearted, who could take and give a joke with anyone, even if said joke was a little off-color in point of purity, and who was behind the bar attending to business, were Mickey McHugh, the bum, Gus, the rowdy, one-armed Scotchy, Monkey Johnny, Shoefly, Ratsy, and Blinky-eyed Smiler, these being perhaps the most notable of the gentlemen guests, if we except Mr. Pat Craddock, the genial host of the Old House at Home, in the Rue de Cherry, a denizen of the squarest and the mildest-mannered man that ever sold a glass of gin or mixed a cocktail, and who had just dropped in for a chaff with Gallus Mag, being in the immediate neighborhood. Among the softer sex present on this occasion were Corky Nell, Bull-eyed Kate, Loony Liz, Shaky, Greenhorn Kitty, Far Down Kitty, Mary, the Mouth, Curly Kate, Peggy Sullivan, the Black Hen, and others whose euphonious appellations and sobriquets have escaped us. It was an old-fashioned contra-dance that was on, and it was being danced, or rather worked, according to individual fancy, the utmost freedom and liberty, not to say license, being observed. All rules were set at defiance, prescribed figures and changes ignored, and time more honored in the breach than in the observance. It had just commenced as Cleo and Prince entered, and for a moment or two they stood looking at the active members of the company as they slid, double-shuffled, pirouetted, and heeled and toed the sanded floor, during which time Cleo manipulated and lighted a cigarette. The sailors and soldiers were all in the dance, and were the gayest of the lot, the exuberance of the former far exceeding that of any others. School was out with them, they were ashore and in for a good time. Cleo's quick eyes glanced from one to another of those present, missing none, commencing with the beautiful young girl, who, not dancing, but seated by herself, seemed oblivious of everything going on around her, and back to this young girl, whose beauty and deportment were as much out of their sphere in this place as pearls in a pig-pen, came her eyes, her glance becoming a gaze, the eyes of the other catching hers the moment they were turned upon her, with naught in them of bold and brazen effrontery, but something of suddenly awakened interest. "Will you get in, gentlemen, and shake the hoof?" This elegantly expressed query came from the master of ceremonies and principal of the Terpsichorean Academy, Jack Perry, who, with a sort of sardonic smile, came up to Cleo and Prince, manipulating his hands as one does when they are cold. Noticing the direction in which the eyes of the former were turned, he said interrogatively, "Handsome, isn't she? She's now round here, ain't been long on the course, I reckon. Won't dance with nobody but her man. He's gone out a while, and won't drink nothin' at all with nobody. She'll get broke into it one of these days, though. They all does." This last was said with a significant smile and a wink, as the speaker glanced at Cleo, who shot one glance of anger and scorn at him, which was unheeded if understood. "I guess she'll shake the leg with you, young feller," he said immediately. "She's gunning you pretty sharp now, and don't look quizby neither. She's gone soft on you, I reckon." Smiling and smirking, rubbing his hands and winking, the master of ceremonies went on to say, "Better take hold of that piece, young fellow. It's a good bit, and worth going for. And maybe you can cut her man out. Ha ha ha!" As he laughed gutturally, he lightly punched Cleo in the ribs, saying, "'Tid be a good joke, a damn good joke. I'll put you on her. Introducts you as first class, and you look like as you might be." Without hesitating, Cleo went over to the bench whereon the young girl was sitting, the light in the eye of the latter indicating, if anything, satisfaction at her approach. "This is my friend Tom Brown, Lily, from Fifth Avenue. Get in and shake the leg with him, and limber up. It'll do you good." Thus was Cleo introduced by the principal, who went back where Prince had been left standing, but who evidently declined a partner, as he immediately went and sat down. "Will you favor me with your hand, miss, for this or the next dance?" asked Cleo, who, with the hand of the young girl, a blonde, in hers, looked kindly into her beautiful blue eyes, her own glorious, lustrous, slow black orbs seemingly deepening in darkness by the contrast. The girl hesitated for a moment, as if calculating the consequences of an affirmative. Then rising to her feet, she said, in a pleasant tone, a slight smile just parting her beautiful lips, "You have my hand. Lead on." The couples took their respective places at the end of the set, Cleo, as though to the manner born, with all the nonchalance she ever exhibited, and perfectly at ease, notwithstanding a jolly Jack Tar, of Nubian lineage, stood on her right, his vis-a-vis and partner being a white woman, and, excepting the blonde, Cleo's partner, the comeliest of the Cyprian crew, though immeasurably the latter's inferior in point of beauty and other points, in all probability. As the dance lagged not in the least, it was not long before our heroine and partner were involved in the mazy, and when they chasséed down the lines, every eye was upon them, the ladies looking admiringly at Cleo, and the gentlemen dividing their glances between the pair, whose graceful movements were the very poetry of motion. 2 or 3 times down, and they came to the head of the set. When they balanced, they did so alone, no other couple doing the like, but all looking on. When they chasséed, no other couple preceded them down the lines, but all stood still and gazed upon the handsome pair as they whirled to the foot of the set, and beyond, lightly and gracefully as 2 feathers floating in ether. No such dancing had ever been seen in that hall before, and while the dance lasted, which was prolonged until Cleo and her partner again reached the head of the set, and again floated, with matchless grace, adown the lines, the outsiders forgot to imbibe, and the bar suffered in consequence.
Chapter 20. Terpsichore. "I never drink anything," said the blonde as Cleo started for the bar with the rest, at the peremptory order, "Promenade to the bar," given at the conclusion of the dance, her arm around the young girl's waist. "Good. I'm glad of it," she returned. "But we will go up, so as not to look stuck up, you know." So with the others, they promenaded to the bar. "Governor," said our heroine to the proprietor, who now got behind the bar himself, "treat the gay dancers to what they want, and all the others as well." The proprietor was all smiles, and so was Gallus Mag. Glasses and bottles were quickly set upon the bar, whiskey and gin and old Jamaica being the beverages contained in the latter vessels. Cleo didn't order any champagne, which could have been furnished, for obvious reasons.
"Shiver me timbers, but you're the loveliest landlubber on his pins I ever saw!"
exclaimed a jolly Jack Tar as Cleo came up, ejecting a huge cut of tobacco as he spoke.
"Blast me tarry toplights, but you're as light as a feather, and smooth as a holy stoned deck,"
he added, decanting a bottle of gin, his partner having turned out her potion the instant before.
Yeah, by golly, by gumbo,"
exclaimed another son of the sea, with a face of ebony and teeth of ivory, Cleo's immediate predecessor in the dance.
"You just went down to hall, you 2 folks did, like a couple of angels on the wing you did. Whew, Way go, da.
The speaker, in this exuberance, essayed a pigeon wing, which, but for the crowd, might have been a success, though it would not have been encored for its grace of execution. "Come, drink your gin," said his partner, the female the next after, a long way after, the blonde in point of comeliness, as she tossed off a glass of juniper juice without winking or taking water. "Turn the corner, ladies and gentlemen," said Cleo, after the dancers and others had imbibed a potion, making off from the bar. The invitation was readily accepted, some few who didn't come up the first time, strange to say, now coming to the front, Prince being about the only one who didn't accept the invitation. He remained seated, with an eye to things in general, and to Cleo in particular. The proprietor smiled more sweetly than before, if that were possible, as our heroine invited the crowd to a repeat, and pushed the unwashed glasses promiscuously about the bar, adding a couple of bottles to those already on the board. It was a very informal drinking party, nobody standing upon the order, but drinking at once, as soon as the liquor could be got hold of. Yet the entertainer was not forgotten, but toasted as Skipper and Commodore by two of the sailors, Major and Colonel by two of the cavalrymen, and as Bully Boy, Brick, Face Trump, Cap'n, Rocks, and other pet names by the civilians, the ladies toasting to Beauty, Black Eyes, Love, Darling, Gay, Gallant, etc. Cleo, as did her companion, taking down a glass of water amid honors falling thick and fast upon her. Throwing a $10 note upon the bar, Cleo asked if that would liquidate her assessment. The proprietor declared herself perfectly satisfied, didn't insult her by mention of change, inviting her to smoke. She declined his invitation, but rolled and lighted a cigarette. With her handsome blonde companion, tastefully and not a little expensively attired, she then started off on a promenade round the hall, arm in arm. She, the admired and coveted of the ladies, and the envied of the gentlemen. Her companion, the admired and coveted of the gentlemen, and the envied and hated of the ladies, for reasons that must be obvious to our readers.
"Gentlemen, take partners for cotillion,"
drawled out the leader of the band, and then commenced to tune his fiddle. Cleo and her companion, deciding not to dance the cotillion, seated themselves, and were soon engaged in close conversation, unmindful of the noisy feet and boisterous tongues of the dancers, as their faces now and then came close together. A strong contrast was afforded in the rich, dark beauty of the other, each looking more pronounced by the juxtaposition. The sad, abstracted look of one communing with bitter thoughts, dwelling upon the past that had brought trouble and sorrow to the present, to last into the future, rested on the face of the blonde, and trouble and sorrow had robbed her face of the roses, leaving only the lily, and she was called Lily, and contemplation of the past had fixed the look of sadness there. But, before the dance was through, a brighter look, one of hope, had taken the place of the other, and tinged the pallor of the handsome face with a flush that was just perceptible. And why the change? Because she had told Tom Brown her story, and because he had bidden her to hope, promising to befriend her. And believing him, she did hope. And what do you think the story was, reader? Why, the same old, old story that has been told from time immemorial to the present day, and which will be told till time's ending. The same old, old story that has been told since men and women were, and which will be told as long as men and women are. Always the same it has been, always the same it will be. Who heard it yesterday? Of them it is told today. Who hear it today? Of them it will be told tomorrow, until the last day of the same old, old story will be told. None profit by the hearing. The experience of others cannot be theirs. But tomorrow, oh, tomorrow. The dance over, the bar was again besieged, Gallus Mag attending to the wants of the inner man and woman this time, without any assistance from her right-hand man, Jack, though it was, "Come, Commodore, come, Colonel, come, Beauty, come, darling, come, get in here, young feller," and the like addressed to Cleo. She declined the invitation to partake, and remained with her new protégé. After a time, the band, having refreshed itself,
struck up a schottische.
Nobody responded. The band played away, but to no purpose. The music it elicited may have possessed charms to soothe the savage beast, but it drew no waltzers to the floor. The fact was, all were looking at Cleo and her partner, as if expecting they would respond, and as though the floor was yielded in deference to them.
"Avast there, skipper! Take your prize in tow, and make for the offing,"
sung out a jolly Jack Tar to Cleo.
"Heave anchor there, me hearty. Shake out your togollansails, set your stunsails, square away, and show us your heels,"
cried another son of the sea, and others, including several ladies, called out for Cleo to come to the front with his partner. The pair looked at one another, and in an instant were on their feet without a word. Requesting the leader of the band to play some favorite air, Cleo and her partner posed for the dance, and at the proper time moved off,
as if the two bodies were one being, and moved by one will.
Adown and around the hall they floated, like two graced in accord, to whom everything but gracefulness was utter strangers. Their bows and slides, their whirls and genuflections were made with matchless grace. Theirs was, indeed, the purest, most perfect poetry of motion, with grace in every step, in every movement, grace.
Never had the eyes of the habitués of that place been so delighted.
It was decidedly a new sensation. Bowing, sliding, whirling, gliding, they drew silent encomiums from every eye. With gaze enraptured, tongues were still. And had they possessed invisible wings, they could not have moved more easily, lightly, and gracefully. No bird ever sailed the air more smoothly, or whirled in circles high aloft with greater ease and grace, than Cleo and her partner skimmed and whirled over and along that sanded floor, scarce touching it with their tiny, light-winged feet. Quite a number, while they were dancing, told in, perhaps by the proprietor, among whom were several ladies and a gentleman of leisure, who looked with scowling brow at Cleo, and with flashing eyes at her partner. It was the latter's man. At the gliding, whirling, handsome pair he looked, wickedly at his woman, savagely at Cleo. Further than this, however, he made no sign. Possibly he may have reasoned that, the pair being the cynosure of all eyes, the object of undivided interest with all present, to interfere and interrupt the dance would not redound to his well-being. If so, he reasoned rightly, for there were those present who would not have suffered the dance to come to an end from interference, without a muss of the liveliest description. Cleo caught the eye of her partner's man almost immediately as he entered, she happening to be facing him, and from its angry glare and the scowl on his brow, knew intuitively who it was. Knowing that the coming of the crisis was only a question of a few moments, she made no effort to keep her companions back to him, as she might have done, but whirled on as before, a little more swiftly, perhaps. As if drawn by a power greater than her own will, went the gaze of the blonde to the spot where stood her man, glaring fiercely at her. One glance, and her eyes dropped, weighted with a leaden fear. One glance, and her face, which had flushed from the exercise of dancing, and from new emotions, paled to the pallid hue it wore before. Her step lost its lightness and elasticity. She hung heavily upon Cleo, and in a moment all motion she lost. The dance was ended. "Oh, he will kill me," she uttered in a low tone, but thrilling with its intensity of expression, and as she spoke these words she clung closely to Cleo, as though confiding in the power of the latter to protect her. "Oh, no, he won't, Lily. He won't kill you, unless he kills me," was the comforting assurance the young girl received from her partner, a splendid young fellow, as she no doubt pronounced him. The tone in which these words were spoken ought to have carried assurance with it, and no doubt it did, for the young girl, though clinging closely to Cleo, did not look as though thoroughly convinced of the truth of her own words, yet she was far from being well at ease. Being near the bar, when the dance came to an end, the dancers were immediately surrounded by the ladies and gentlemen present, receiving many rough compliments from lips unused to the diction of Chesterfield, but compliments nevertheless, roughly worded as they were. The ladies looked nothing if not admiration at Cleo, the darling fellow, and nothing if not envy and hatred at the blonde, while with the gentlemen, our heroine was the lion of the moment. It was evident that the ladies, however much their eyes may have been pleased by the graceful dancing of the handsome pair, were pleased in mind that the dance had so suddenly terminated, as, not shining themselves,
They didn't wish their congener to shine so resplendently.
it was the dog-in-the-manger disposition, and well knowing the cause of its sudden termination, and hating the blonde for her beauty and accomplishments, they exulted inwardly, as they pictured to themselves the trouncing she would get from her outraged man, and showed their feelings by words and looks as well.
"He'll give you hell, I guess, towhead,"
said one blear-eyed, bloated Cyprian, employing the sobriquet that envy had bestowed upon the fair-haired girl, and touching the latter's shoulder as she spoke, the guess being the offspring of the wish. The girl shrunk from the touch, and shuddered at the ill-omened words. Into the crowd now rudely and roughly pushed the man whose entrance to the hall, and the sight of whom, had caused the blonde such perturbation, fear, and derangement. And if the imprecations uttered by a number of the masculines had not answered, his eyes would have seen naught, and the spiritual part of his being would have been in a place represented as being very warm, for the man was unpopular, with the speakers at least, and had interfered with their enjoyment. Chapter 21. Trouble. "You come here!" exclaimed the man savagely, addressing the blonde as he burst through the crowd, prefixing the words given with an oath, and suffixing them with epithets the vilest and a term the foulest. "She won't come to you, you brute!" Cleo exclaimed, her eyes flashing, and her whip, which she had carried through the dances, changing positions in her hand, which now grasped it in reverse, with the butt to the fore. The lioness within her breast was fully roused. "Who in hell are you, you goddamn swell, you?" the man savagely roared out, looking fiercely at Cleo. The next instant, the black-browed, brutal bully launched a blow at the face of the blonde. Quick as was the movement of his arm, the movement of Cleo's whip was quicker. The gleam of its golden butt, seen for an instant as it rose and fell, was followed by a sharp, crackling sound, and the bully's arm dropped powerless to his side. The heavy butt fell upon the back of the bully's hand a shade of an instant before the latter reached the face of the blonde, quick enough to prevent her features from being crushed to a bloody pulp, but not quick enough to prevent a slight contact, as the blood that gushed from the nose of the young girl proved. With a howl of pain and yell of rage, the baffled bully sprung at Cleo, but before reaching her, both his arms were caught from behind in the powerful grasp of Prince, who had worked into the crowd with the man he held, thinking him bent on mischief. Fiercely, the bully struggled to free himself from the grasp of his captor, but held as he was, he struggled in vain, the advantage being altogether with Prince, and would have been, in any event, as far as physical strength was concerned, he being much the more powerful of the two. Failing to free himself, and foaming with rage, the bully gave vent to the fiercest raving and the most fearful oaths, threatening to murder the trio, Cleo, Prince, and the blonde.
"Oh, we hear enough about your killing folks. You'll do a little work for the state first."
These words came from the eldest of two officers who had suddenly come to the front, and the most experienced, as one could see, was and is a terror to evildoers on his beat, and who, within a short time, had a pistol fight with a gang of river pirates infesting the East River, killing one of the gang. In less time than we can write it, the officer had adorned with steel bracelets the wrists of the blasphemous bully, who raved and cursed more fiercely and wickedly, if possible, than when in the hands of Prince. There was very little ceremony employed in the putting on of the bracelets, and as little in the taking off of the braceleted. "Come," said the officer, snapping the bracelet on the left wrist of his man. "We'll be moving." The fellow not starting, he was started by the officers, and most unceremoniously propelled out of the hall, cursing both loud and deep as he was forced along, and vowing a terrible vengeance against all concerned. By this time, the blonde, whom Gallus Mag, rough and unpolished, but good-natured and good-hearted, had taken in charge, showed no signs of the blow she had received, excepting a slight redness of her nose from irritation, and a few bloodstains on the front of her dress. She looked more beautiful than ever, for her face was bright with an expression of intense relief from chains that galled her, from an incubus that was most oppressive, weighting her heart with a leaden heaviness. She came to the side of Cleo at once, as a matter of course, for she considered the handsome young fellow not only her protector, but good friend, perhaps the only friend she had in the world, and her young heart went outwards towards him, as she understood matters, big with gratitude, if not love. Amid the many compliments for the part she had taken in the scene just ended, and remarks concerning the latter, Cleo returned to the bar, behind which stood Gallus Mag, laughing or cracking jokes with 2 or 3 habitués, saying gaily, "Come, Mag, up with the bottles and glasses. I have been the cause of stagnation in the business of the bar, and will make amends now. Trot out the beverages and cigars." Jack got in, and, lending a helping hand, it was not long before all got their rations of gin, Jamaica, or whiskey as they preferred, and cigars as well, for those who smoked. As before, Cleo tendered a repeat, which was accepted, everyone coming to the front, she and Prince, and the blonde, drinking lemon soda, and, as before, she was toasted by the gentlemen and ladies, including Jack and Gallus Mag, who took whiskey straights in theirs. A $10 note, handed to the latter personage, sufficed as before. For the entertainment, when Cleo turned to the crowd and said, "As I've interfered with your pleasures somewhat, ladies and gentlemen, I'll try to make amends to you. Get in and have a dance, and I'll do the musical on the violin." Turning to Prince, she said, "Look out for her," referring to her new protégé. "Dance with her. Why not?" Her injunction, "look out for her," was needless, for not one of that motley crew, among whom were roughs and abandoned characters of the lowest grades, if not villains of the deepest dye, would have molested either the protégé or the patroness after what had transpired. Not one. And as for the rest of the sentence, "Dance with her. Why not?" that was needless too, for Prince would have proposed it himself, and did, and danced, and never had he a handsomer or more graceful partner, except when Cleo had tripped the light fantastic with him months before.
Chapter 22. Reeling. 7/8 of the company present took places on the floor, Cleo suggesting the Virginia reel, as she tuned up the violin, which instrument the leader of the band had graciously yielded upon her application, realizing before she got through with it that there was more music in the old fiddle than he had ever dreamed of in his philosophy. Being really a good, though long-tortured and, consequently, long-suffering instrument, the patient fiddle, under the hands of Cleo, sent forth strains that were little short of the most ravishing, its owner sitting spellbound, and never once taking his eyes from the player thereon, from the first note until the last died away, the melody ringing in his ears, no doubt, a long time subsequent. After a prelude of her own composition, Cleo struck up the old, time-honored and patriotic melody of Yankee Doodle. With the first note, the feet of the dancers were in motion. Before the first figures of the dance were completed, not a foot remained stationary on the floor. 2 minutes, and those not engaged in the figures danced and swung in their own account, simply because they couldn't help it. But what is the matter? A number stop and look at Cleo, who is drawing strains the most entrancing from the old begrimed instrument in her hand. And others cease dancing too. In a moment others. All, at length, become motionless, with eyes fixed upon the player, who was drawing forth music such as they had never heard before. That's what the matter was, reader. They were entranced. Cleo ceased for an instant, and with a merry laugh, said, "Come, come, go on, what's the matter with you?" striking in again as she spoke, and filling the hall in an instant with a flood of melody. Her words broke the charm. The dancers were off again, livelier than before. In 3 minutes there was more trouble. One by one the dancers stopped and looked at Cleo as before. One by one they ceased motion, until Prince and his partner alone kept moving, they too soon ceasing. Rattling off a rivulet of notes foreign to the tune, Cleo again laughed merrily, saying, "Why, what is the matter with you? You are the queerest people I ever saw. Now, get in." Again was the charm broken. Again she struck up the tune, and again the dance went bravely on. A minute, and all those who had taken no part in the dance, but who had sat spectators of the scene, got to their feet, forced from their seat into movement, by the power of the bow, magical in the hands of Cleo. Barring the latter, every soul in the hall, including Jack and Gallus Mag, the harpist and tambourinist, these performers having been excused from duty by Cleo, when she took the violin in hand, was on the floor and in motion. They danced who never danced before, while those who had danced all the more. For a time the dancers were boisterous, unable to restrain their spirits, but this boisterousness grew less by degrees, and less, until only the torrent of melody that poured forth from the violin, and the sounds of feet swiftly gliding over the sanded floor, were heard. The dancers were rapt, and moved without will, impelled by the magical strains elicited by Cleo. Figures were forgotten, position ignored, partners unheeded, everyone seeming to be dancing on his or her own hook, or with whomsoever they pleased, as they pleased. Up and down, around and across the hall the dancers swung and whirled and glided, singly, by couples and by dozens, going this way and that way, with reference to nothing but time, which they kept excellently well, present a rapidly changing kaleidoscopic picture of queer characteristics and diverse colors. Faster played Cleo, faster and faster. Faster whirled the dancers, faster and faster. A carnival of melody it was, a revel of motion. Suddenly she struck up a gallopade, her own improvisation, a rapid, rattling, weird, wild, fantastic, maddening melody, and then the revel became a raunt, a maddening maze of moving men and women. Quicker and wilder the dancers flew, adown, back, around, across the hall, like so many being impelled to involuntary motion by magical power, like so many forms of obeying the will of a mighty magician. For some moments Cleo kept them at it, when suddenly she ceased playing, looking at the dancers, dazed with the magic melody she had called forth, with an eye kindled to delight, and a smile that was jollity itself. And the dancers kept on whirling, swinging, madly moving, as though the music that had made them mad still sounded in their ears, or as though the spell cast upon them had not been broken with the ceasing of the melody, Prince and his partner even whirling in a giddy waltz for a moment or two. They stopped, however, soon, and almost instantly the others, as though suddenly waking from a dream, many of them looking sheepish and ashamed, and others astonished. Cleo, the enchantress, laughed heartily, as she looked at and read the expression on the motley crew, which stood for an instant as if spellbound to the floor. Only an instant, and men began to stagger, and women began to reel, and two of the latter fell flat to the floor, punctuating with a swoon the conclusion of the wild revel of the maddening dance. And from the breast of many came long-drawn respirations, expressive of relief or regret. It would have been hard to tell which. Suddenly a dozen men, with one accord, sprung towards Cleo, and, without a word, raised her to their shoulders, the violin and bow still in her hands. With this act they found tongue, crying as they moved off, "Give us a tune! Play Widow Machree! Pipe up Life on the Ocean Wave! Give us Pat Malloy!"